Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to come out this morning. You know, it's really easy once you get elected and come to Washington, D.C., to put it in cruise control and just go along with the status quo. But that's not why I ran for Congress, and that's not why I came to Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, I was one of the Americans in 2016 that looked at a presidential stage of 17 Republican candidates, and the only one that stood out to me was Donald John Trump, the very man that stood out and represented Republican voters and Americans all over the country that were sick and tired of a Republican establishment failing us over and over again. That's why I supported him in 2016. That's why I supported him in 2020. And that's why I support him now. But what happened when President Trump became president and the Republican majority in the House and the Republican majority in the Senate is the Republican establishment under Paul Ryan failed President Trump and failed the agenda that we wanted to get done. They passed a $1.3 trillion omnibus that did not fund the wall after we had stood at Trump rally after Trump rally and said, build the wall. They failed us. They funded the uniparty agenda. They funded the status quo that Washington, D.C. just wants to keep going and keep going. And you know what happened? That's why Republicans lost the midterms in 2018 and Nancy Pelosi became Speaker. Republicans didn't fight. They allowed the Russia hoax. And then what happened? When Democrats took over the House, it was impeachment number one, and the entire war against President Trump continued. And that war on President Trump is the war on the same voters today that are ready to go and vote for that man in November and put him in the White House in January. And that's exactly what is happening. He's winning poll after poll after poll because he's the only one fighting while Republicans in the House and Republicans in Washington continue to cave and be part of the uniparty. Mitch McConnell has a 6% approval rating for a reason. And that's because he's caved to the Democrats and continued the disgusting business model in Washington, D.C. that thrives on forever wars and thrives on building a bigger government and taking away the freedoms bit by bit by bit of Americans. Republican voters in America, Americans altogether, gave Republicans the House. They gave us the House in 2022. You want to know why? Because they were fed up with the Democrat agenda that is destroying this country. Wide open borders, an economy that's crashing, freedoms being stolen, COVID shutdowns, all the horrors that happened when Joe Biden took the White House and Democrats took full control. That's why we won the House in 2022. But what have we done with it? What are we giving Republican voters to vote for? President Trump is the reason why people are going to turn out in November. And I'm here fighting every single day to push my party to be a Republican-controlled majority that will fight and pass his agenda when he's in the White House in January. And right now, we are not that Republican majority. We have a speaker, Mike Johnson, that we all, by the way, I elected him. I voted for that man. So I have every right to be standing here. It wasn't a choice of America. It was a choice within our Republican conference. And I voted for Mike Johnson because his voting record before he became Speaker was conservative. He voted against funding Ukraine. He was solidly pro-life. He voted to secure the border. He voted to fight against Democrats, fight against the witch hunt against President Trump. But once he became Speaker, he has become a man that none of us recognize. He passed 3 continuing resolutions, and then he finally passed a 2-part omnibus that fully funded Joe Biden's agenda and the Democrat agenda, funded the Department of Justice that wants to put President Trump in jail for the rest of his life, which is a death sentence. Mike Johnson fully funded the FBI, which raided Mar-a-Lago, and he gave him a brand new building as a gift. Pro-life Mike Johnson funded full-term abortion clinics, funded the trans agenda on children that 70% of Americans are completely against on both sides of the aisle. And he fully funded Joe Biden's open border policies, the #1 issue in America. So I entered a motion to vacate, but I didn't call it for a vote. I was controlled. I was responsible. I was being conscious and caring about my conference and our majority. It was a warning to stop serving the Democrats and support our Republican conference and support our agenda. And he didn't do it. And we all went home. And Republican voters everywhere, Americans were raging at Mike Johnson. And he doubled down. He didn't change course. He continued. And when we came back, he reauthorized FISA. And he was the deciding vote himself to stop the warrant requirement of FISA. He voted it down. When only 6 months before that, before Speaker, he was for it. That was the second betrayal. And then we all went home and America raged, and I was still responsible. I was still patient, and I was still being careful with our Republican majority. And then we came back. And that's when Mike Johnson fully joined the disgusting business model of Washington, D.C. to fund forever wars. Yeah, that's what this is. The Uniparty is Make Ukraine Great Again. The Uniparty is all about funding every single foreign war. They think this is the business model that needs to be done.